It offered everything that might appeal to a young students, taverns and bars. In a time without clean drinking water and wine, a state drink. It even had its own municipal brothel, run by the city council. But Erfurt was also unique in more elevated ways.
It wasn't a great center of manufacturing or political religion. They reckon that there were 14 different religious orders represented within it. There were 25 parish churches. In fact, Erfurt had the name at the time of the religion sects because it had such a concentration of ecclesiastics.
Good. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'll try to catch you today and get more
He
words.
became a keen musician.
Thanks.
He forged a number of close friendships with his fellow students.
Luther had really moved at around the age of 14, 15. Context of learning, away from family, amongst peers, very, very demanding. So the connections between the young men there could be very, very strong, a terrific sort of bonding. They became family to each other. So friends were, at that stage in life, I think, were everything you had.
Luther stuck firmly to his studies. He gained his Bachelor of Arts and then his Master's degrees. To take it all, he would be everything his father wished. But suddenly, all the certainties of Luther's life were shattered. In the year 1505, plague struck Erfurt. Disease ran amok through the city's narrow streets, leaving death and anguish in its wake.
The thing about the Black Death that most frightened people was that it came upon them without warning. Some people were struck down, others were spared. Some towns were devastated by it, while others quite close by. So it was impossible to explain. Nobody knew how you caught it, and nobody knew why you caught it, except that they had a general sense that God was punishing them for their sins. It was a terrible, visible sign of punishment.
The Black Death had killed almost half of Europe's population in the previous 100 years. But the epidemic will now touch Luther directly. 3 of his friends were killed by the disease. And this calamity, the fear of God's wrath, would lead to the first great turning point in Luther's life. Luther now was returning to Erfurt No one knows exactly what happened to Luther that night, but it struck him to his very soul.
Ecce civitas sanctificata est deserta, Zion deserta pacta, Jerusalem desolata.
The monasteries and convents of Europe were a society in themselves. For the faithful, they offered a life devoted to prayer, meditation, and a search for salvation.
The monastic life was dominated by the rhythm of the 7 hours of the liturgical day, which meant that 7 times in the day monks had to be there in choir, singing and saying parts of the service. And that included getting up in the middle of the night. When you weren't taking part in liturgical services, your life was also rigorously regulated. In many monasteries, speaking was only allowed in certain places and at certain times. All privacy was removed from them. Their food was supposed to be very simple. Monks' clothing was also very hard, harsh, and not comfortable.
Why wear these clothes that made you so uncomfortable? Why go to all these services? Why eat such poor food? The answer seems to be that it was by the renunciation of everything that the world regarded as comfortable, valuable, and so on, that salvation was to be achieved. And Luther clearly believed that the only way achieving salvation was by completely renouncing the world and immersing himself in a community which cut him off from it.
Two weeks after the night in the forest, Luther joined one of the most severe monastic orders in Germany, the Eremite Augustinians of strict observance. His hair was cut. He was clothed in the white robes of the novice monk. And he prostrated himself before the abbot. He had been welcomed into the very heart of the Catholic Church.
It was not the kind of order that you would choose if you wanted a comfortable or easy life. It wasn't that kind of religious house at all. It was, however, I think a good order for someone to join. He was also quite spiritually and mentally gifted.
But Luther's new home was as much a business as a spiritual retreat. The abbot was running a thriving trade in dyeing cloth. The monks had a brewery distilling Morada. While the monastery owned land across the neighborhood, making a tidy income from rent and tithes. All diligently accounted for in the monastery's extensive business records.
The church wouldn't have pleaded for support from its people. It would have demanded it. It had the power to levy tithes, which were not a voluntary contribution, which if you did not pay, you could be made to pay. And people on the whole were willing to pay those fees because they were taught so firmly, right from their earliest childhood, that if they did not have the services of the church, their souls would be in peril.
This profiteering of the church would ultimately outrage and disgust Luther. But for now, he was concerned only with his soul. He threw himself into the isolated, ascetic life of the church's devoted followers. He soon white robe of the novitiate to the black of the confirmed monk, the only piece of clothing he now owned.
He tells us that he wasn't in there to find out about it, to have a good time. That, for example, means, well, just to pick up one feature, it means fasting, it means recurring fasting, it means really bodily, physical self-denial.
The monk's strict routine of prayer and study was accompanied by a regime of persecution of the flesh. Initiates were encouraged to sleep without coverings or blankets, even to whip themselves.
One of the things they're trying to do is to imitate the sufferings of Christ, to be what is called an ascetic, to believe that by dominating your fleshly desires, by no longer needing food, sexual companionship, the comforts of life, you are identifying yourself with Christ in the wilderness, battling with the forces of evil in yourself, by battling with your own lower nature.
Luther threw himself into this regime with sleep without blankets until his fellow monks dragged him in after years. He would complain that these years in the monastery had permanently ruined his health.
If ever a monk should have got to heaven by his monkery, then it was I. If I kept on any longer, then I would have killed myself with vigils, prayers, reading, and other work.
Everything Luther did throughout his life, Luther did to the brain. Luther did everything 110%. And when Luther was in the mood to be a monk, you know, he gives it his all. He gives it his every shot. Good monk.
But Luther's devotion now began to exceed anything expected by his fellow monks. He was increasingly concerned that he would never make it to heaven, that he had swapped one unforgiving father for one even more impossible. Luther talked vividly of a mounting feeling of hopelessness, calling it Anfechtung, a sense that he would never achieve salvation.
Not merely by our Lord's word, but by experience and feeling.
The greater his sense of despair, the more Luther's life into the ritual of the church.
In that he dearly cared about being reconciled. His quest, his agonizing, his deep seriousness. We hope that he's going to find some resolution, otherwise he's going to lead a tormented life.
For 5 years, Luther labored without relief. Then in 1510, he was offered an escape from his cloistered life. He was sent by his order on a mission to Rome, one of the church's greatest pilgrimages.
Going to Rome was a very special pilgrimage because this was the capital of the Roman Catholic Church. And indeed, from the Western perspective, it is the capital of Christendom, period. Luther admitted he would make the best of this trip that he could.
Rome was a treasure trove of holiness, of St. Peter's, the Pope, and the remains of countless saints and martyrs. Tens of thousands of pilgrims flocked to Rome every year, all hoping the journey would bring them closer to God.
You dress differently, you take a stick, you walk, you live very modestly. There are little hostels along the routes for pilgrims. So that when you get to the place of pilgrimage, in a way you're in a state of such penance and deservedness that encountering the saints too, which is at the end of the pilgrimage, you'll be worthy to partake in the grace of encountering it.
It took a full 2 months for Luther and his companion to make the long journey south. And then, in October of 1510, they finally arrived at the Eternal City. Luther arrived in Rome just as the Renaissance was reaching its height. Michelangelo was painting the scenes of the Sistine Chapel. Raphael was hard at work decorating the Pope.
Horrific shock to the system.
First approach for entered into the city, he seems to have been absolutely overwhelmed by the idea that here he was in the holy city, here he was in the presence of so many martyrs, and at the center of the church. And it probably took a little while for the gloss to wear off, although wear off it did.
Among the palaces and great churches, Luther would now discover a very earthly institution. For this city was as much about money as religion.
The papacy as an institution for gathering in cash is really a kind of huge thing, sucking in money from throughout the church. Church dealt
In Rome, Luther discovered a cynicism that shocked him to the core. He reported that when he typically tried to preach a mass in one of the city's magnificent churches, the priest next to him said, "Just get on with it." And that as he held up the bread he believed had been transformed into the body of Christ, another priest muttered, "Bread thou art, and bread thou wilt remain."
I think the disappointment in Rome has been just absolutely devastating. Here was something which I think he was still open to find as a sort of elevating experience, to kind of the pinnacle of the institution that in different ways he has become a servant of. And yet finding that in a way, nobody speaks his language in more ways than one.
Luther also discovered that the church was happy to profit from its pilgrims. For a fee, he was allowed to enter the crypt of the church of Santa Callista. Here, he could view the remains of 46,000 Christian martyrs. This would earn him what was called an indulgence, releasing him from time and purgatory after death. Purgatory was where Christians would have their sins burned out of them for what could be thousands of years before they were finally allowed to enter heaven. The chance to buy time off from purgatory was an extremely attractive offer for the faithful, and very profitable for the church. But as Luther trekked from one pilgrimage site to another, desperate to find salvation, he was overtaken by a steadily mounting fear. Could all this really bring him closer to God? Until finally it is said that Luther collapsed, questioning for the first time the teachings of the church to which he had vowed his life.
Who knows if it is really so?
Luther was clearly very disillusioned by Rome, not simply by the spiritual superficiality, but also by the way in which he felt that Rome simply did not reflect Christianity as he understood it.
Luther had a sense of the answer having eluded him. He did not have a feeling of God's loving him any better. Thus, he had to find an answer in some other way.
Luther's trip to Rome had brought only disillusion and doubt. And life in the monastery now offered even less consolation than before. Still desperate to ensure his salvation, Luther spent his life in endless confession, laying bare his soul up to 4 times a day for as long as 6 hours at a time, spending the rest of his days in penance.
There is something about Luther who feels that he never can quite do it, and yet he has to do it. He would confess and would be absolved, and that's the way the church was supposed to deal with that. And most monks, that would be enough. He said, "You're forgiven." But that little voice back there said, "You're not really sorry." And so he had to go and confess again and be absolved again. And the little voice said, "No, you didn't really mean that." This is the most heavy. Here he was doing the most important, the best thing you could do that his society said, and it gave him no relief.
Clearly his mind was racing, and with his sensibility, and he was not getting. And then the extraordinary guilt. Why, monasticism has worked for tens and hundreds of thousands of men. What's wrong with me?
So now you know why you like Galatians so much? Salvation by faith.
However irreproachably I lived as a monk, I could feel myself only as a sinner with a conscience full of guilt. Nor could I believe that I pleased God with my labor. Indeed, I hated this God. And so I raged against myself with a fierce and troubled conscience.
It would take the labor and insight of another to help Luther escape this prison of his own anguish, and unwittingly set him on the path to revolution. In 15th, the order sent him to a smaller monastery in the town of Wittenberg. Wittenberg was tiny, home to little more than a couple of churches and a newly founded university. But here, the monk Johann von Staupitz took Luther under his wing. Staupitz was a leading member of Luther's order, and he was determined to release the younger monk from his cycle of despair. Staupitz announced to Luther that he had decided to make him professor of Bible studies at Wittenberg's new university, forcing him to look after the spiritual needs of others, rather than simply raging against himself. Luther stated reasons why he could not possibly take the job, not least that so much work would kill him. Staupitz's wry response still survives. Quite all right. God has plenty of work for clever men in heaven.
I think Staupitz knew very well how to handle with a combination of sympathy, gentle mockery, and above all, I think by seeing his gifts, seeing his brilliance and his capacity for academic. Staupitz, I think, is saying you've got to get into that state where at night, instead of going through the dark nights, he's so shattered that he just collapses and sleeps soundly like a baby for 8 hours.
Staupitz's instincts would prove astonishingly accurate. Faced with a class of students to whom he had to explain the Bible, Luther now had to engage with the world, rather than just blame himself for his failures.
He has to get up in a classroom and say what's what. It's no longer thinking himself. It's no longer discussion with brother nuns. It is actually pronouncing with authority.
He threw himself into his work, studying not only the standard Latin texts, but reading the new Greek and Hebrew editions. And as he pondered, noted, and reasoned his way through his faith, Luther was struck by a deep revelation. A revelation that questioned everything he had been taught about his church.
Luther had been brought up to believe that the person who was saved is the person who went out and achieved salvation. He now began to realize that to